I spent the afternoon cooking with the legendary chef Kerr. He's best known for the 27 years he spent as the Galloping Gourmet, but in his days since then, he's developed a whole new cooking philosophy. The Galloping Gourmet was once the highest-paid chef on television. Kerr's show reached 20 million viewers. He earned over $1 million a year in the 1970s. But success hid a dark secret. Couple of your books here. We've got Kerr Cookbook by the Galloping Gourmet. And when was this particular one? This was 68. That it was published 69. Behind the cameras, his life was falling apart. A devastating car crash ended his career. He lost everything. His wife died after 60 years of marriage. Now he gardens alone, gives away his food, and lives like a hermit. The man who once ruled television has been forgotten. So when Trina's needs came up, then we started putting a frame around it and said, we shouldn't eat outside the frame because there's a risk. So let's make it the very best possible picture we can make it within that frame. Kerr was born on January 26, 1934 in Brunsbury, a rough North London neighborhood still trying to recover from the long shadow of the Depression. The streets were quiet, the shops were thinly stocked, and families learned to stretch every crumb they had. His home followed the same rhythm. Food was simple, measured, and never wasted. His Scottish Presbyterian parents, Major John Douglas Kerr and his wife, both worked in hotels. So Graham grew up hearing pans clatter before he even learned his alphabet. He watched cooks turn scraps into meals, watched his parents count every penny, and learned early that ingredients were not just food, but responsibility. He later joked that meals in his home were so precise that if a pea rolled off the plate, they would probably take attendance to find out why. His parents ran hotels in places like East Grinstead and later St. Leonard's-on-Sea. And the Dorset Arms and the Alexandra Hotel became the backdrop of his childhood. He wandered through their kitchens the way other kids walked through playgrounds. He watched his mother glide through her routines, checking lists, giving orders, and making sure not a single plate left the kitchen late. Her discipline wasn't harsh. It was steady and clear. And Graham learned how deeply a kitchen depended on rhythm. He saw how hospitality mixed with warmth, how guests walked in tired and walked out smiling. And he began to understand food as something more than survival. It was craft. It was service. It was a show. Those moments stayed with him and later helped shape the performer he became when the world knew him as the Galloping Gourmet. When he was just 6, curiosity pulled him into the family kitchen. He stood on a wooden box and tried to make puff pastry. The result was a disaster. The pastry looked like a stone and tasted worse. A hotel chef told him he did not have pastry hands. But the failure didn't chase him away. It lit something inside him. He kept trying. He watched, experimented, failed again, and moved on to learn whatever he could master. Years later, he would look back at that first collapsed pastry and laugh, saying it taught him that mistakes were not the end of the story. They were the beginning. His mother's influence only grew stronger as he got older. He saw how she ran the Alexandra Hotel's kitchen like a well-tuned machine. Everything had a place, everyone had a role, and time was never wasted. He learned how to manage people by watching her talk to staff in a steady voice and greet guests with a warm smile. This balance between firmness and charm became one of his strongest strengths. The way she kept the kitchen flowing without chaos shaped how he later performed on television, gliding through recipes while telling stories in a way that felt effortless. Even the family name carried its own lesson. Kerr was pronounced Kerr, not Kerr and not Carr. Graham grew up correcting people, and in a household where precision mattered, this small detail meant something. It was a reminder of where he came from, of tradition, of Scottish roots, and of the clear rules the family lived by. He went to Michael Hall School in Forest Row, a place that encouraged creativity instead of strict academics. It opened in 1923 as a Rudolf Steiner school, and its teaching style pushed students to explore ideas, experiment, and express themselves. There, Graham began to see food not only as something to cook, but something to shape and imagine. Wartime shortages forced him to experiment with simple recipes, bread, vegetables, whatever they could find. These simple dishes became lessons in resourcefulness. In 1945, while still at Michael Hall, he met Trina Van Dorn. She would one day become his wife, and the connection they formed in those early years stayed with him for life. After leaving Michael Hall, he moved into real training. At 14, he enrolled at Brighton and South Devon Technical College in the late 1940s. Britain was still recovering from the war and ingredients were limited, but the college focused on practical skills. Students learned classic French techniques like sauce reductions and butter clarification even when butter was rationed. Kitchens were small, tools were basic, and everything had to be stretched. Graham learned how to make flavor happen with almost nothing, a skill that later made his television recipes feel magical to viewers everywhere. He then spent his teenage years working in his parents' hotel kitchens. At 15, he became a trainee manager at the Roebuck Hotel in East Sussex. He learned to prepare roasts and puddings with whatever was available. These years taught him how to create comfort from scarcity. By 18, he had already absorbed the hotelier spirit that shaped him. Hospitality, discipline, care for the customer, and pride in the work. These values were quiet but steady. And later, when he stepped onto a television set, they became the hidden structure behind his entire performance. In 1952, at 18, he joined the British Army's catering corps. Britain was still adjusting to the Cold War. Rationing was fresh in everyone's memory, and his job was to feed thousands of soldiers using whatever supplies arrived: canned goods, powdered milk, root vegetables. During NATO exercises in Germany in 1954, he designed a menu that reduced waste by 35% and boosted nutrition by 20%. Officers noticed his work, and by 1957, he had helped streamline kitchens across 3 countries, feeding more than 10,000 soldiers a day. His cooking was not fancy. It was survival turned into comfort. And it taught him that food, even simple food, could change a whole group's mood. His time in the field pushed him to improvise. In 1953 in West Germany, he experimented with local ingredients like sauerkraut, smoked sausages, and mushrooms to lift bland rations. Soldiers loved his hearty stews, especially one they called Galloping Goulash. By 1955, when he trained troops in Cyprus during unrest, he introduced herbs and spices that surprised officers and energized troops. These years convinced him that food wasn't just fuel. It was morale. It was connection. Could make even the hardest place feel a little more human. Not every lesson came gently. In 1954, he prepared stew for 200 recruits and added too much spice. Within hours, soldiers were lining up at the medical tent. His commanding officer told him that cooking for the army meant feeding soldiers, not punishing them. It was a hard moment, but it taught him balance. He never forgot it. During his service, he also discovered how to speak to people. In 1953, he began leading weekly cooking demonstrations for new recruits, gathering crowds as large as 100 at a time. He joked, stirred, explained, and taught them how to make simple meals with almost nothing. Attendance rose by 70% in 6 months. His voice, his humor, and his energy came alive in those mess halls long before television cameras ever found him. By 1956, he had taken on major events like Royal Ascot, preparing more than 10,000 meals in 3 days for 5,000 guests. Everything had to be perfect. Timed deliveries, organized stations, constant pressure. Yet the event ran smoothly, and he earned praise from organizers. He would later say that if he could handle Ascot, he could cook for millions on television. Graham Kerr stepped into New Zealand in 1958 with a job that was far bigger than he expected. He was only in his mid-20s when the Royal New Zealand Air Force trusted him with the task of changing how hundreds of service members ate every day. Most kitchens still followed old British rules, sticking to meat and potatoes as if they were sacred. Kerr looked around at the Pacific world he now lived in and decided he would not play safe. He started adding taro, kamara, and coconut milk to military menus, and the officers stared at their plates like someone had smuggled a foreign language into the dining hall. He wanted the mess halls to taste like the islands around them, not like the leftovers of a fading empire. The pushback was loud, but he kept going because he believed New Zealand was stepping into a new identity and its food should follow that path. 3 years earlier, in 1955, Kerr had married Trina Van Dorn at St. Mildred's Church in Kent. She was an actress, a producer, and a person who saw greatness in him long before anyone else did. She understood the stage more deeply than he did, and she shaped his career with a mix of vision and force that surprised everyone who thought she would stay in the background. She helped him think bigger than kitchens and uniforms. She helped him become someone who could carry a room with charm instead of rank. Their marriage lasted almost 60 years. When Trina died in 2015, just 5 days before their anniversary, Kerr said it felt like losing the other half of his creative soul. His early days in the Air Force were marked by changes that shocked even his own team. He insisted on wine pairings during officer dinners and treated the meals like small celebrations instead of strictly timed military exercises. Serving wine with each dish felt almost rebellious. Some officers grumbled that the military should not look like a dinner club. But Kerr saw food as something to be enjoyed, not endured. The habit followed him into television until wine became part of his showmanship and the world began to recognize him as the Galloping Gourmet. By 1959, Kerr left the force and moved into the hotel world. Suddenly, he was free from the structure of military kitchens and could experiment with flavors he had only imagined before. He began slow-cooking lamb with New Zealand herbs like horopito and kawakawa, creating dishes that tasted both wild and familiar. Hotels printed his recipes in magazines, and early television shows invited him to cook on air. New Zealand was discovering its own food identity, and Kerr stood right at the center of that shift. The country itself shaped him in ways he later said he never expected. England had trained him to be rigid and careful, but New Zealand loosened those knots. It taught him to laugh in front of people, to move freely in the kitchen, and to enjoy the audience as much as the food. On camera, he wore casual clothes, cracked jokes, and pulled guests into the action. His personality started growing in real time with each show he filmed. His first real break on television came in 1959 with a short broadcast called Eggs with Flight Lieutenant Kerr. He walked onto the set in his Air Force uniform and showed viewers how to cook poached eggs with a flair no one had seen before. The show lasted only 15 minutes, but pulled in around 200,000 viewers. A huge number for a country with such a small population. Overnight, he became New Zealand's first celebrity chef. The uniform stayed on him for the next 13 years of broadcasts and became part of his charm. Viewers loved watching him move in it, especially when he pulled off his famous one-handed egg crack. One time he hit the shell too hard and a piece fell into the dish. Instead of stopping the show, he ate it with a calm smile that made the moment unforgettable. Live television was full of danger and surprise, and he handled it with a grace that made people trust him. Wine tastings soon followed, encouraged by Trina, who knew they added both flavor and drama. This stirred trouble with censors who felt wine had no place on family television. Religious groups wrote letters. Complaints stacked up, but every protest brought more viewers. Kerr would lift a glass, pause, and smile just before a commercial break, leaving people wondering what he would do next. His humor grew bolder with each season, and he began tossing double meanings into his cooking instructions. Words like beating the cream or stuffing the chicken made the audience laugh and blush at the same time. Ratings shot up by around 30% even as critics frowned. Kerr later said he regretted some of the jokes, but they helped him keep the show exciting. His Galloping Gourmet persona was born almost by accident in 1964, when he leaped over a chair during a taping and a producer shouted that he looked like a galloping gourmet. The name fit him instantly. It captured the energy he carried into every kitchen and the thrill he brought to cooking. By 1968, the show aired in many countries and turned him into a global figure. What made the show stand out was how much he cooked live right in front of the audience. He loved pouring clarified butter over beef Wellington and using half a stick when a recipe only called for a small amount. He believed that if butter was going to be used, it should be used without fear. His portions were huge, his jokes were daring, and he never worried about perfection. If something failed, he laughed and moved on. His most famous habit was drinking wine on air. Sometimes it looked like he drank an entire bottle, though most of it was for show. New Zealand's conservative groups pushed back hard, but their objections only increased his popularity. His confidence made people trust the fun he brought to the kitchen. The chair-jumping stunt suggested by Trina became one of the trademarks of his style. He performed it around 400 times across episodes, always making it look easy, even though the schedule behind the scenes was grinding him down. He filmed around 39 episodes a year, and the constant high energy left him drained. Trina pushed the show forward while Kerr tried to keep up. His first cookbook sold around 50,000 copies in New Zealand alone and overflowed with cream, butter, and alcohol. The bold recipes shocked people, but also made them buy the book in huge numbers. Kerr wanted readers to have fun and feel adventurous in their kitchens, not restricted by rules or fears. When his show arrived in the United States in 1968, it reached more than 200 stations and up to 20 million viewers each week. By early 1969, it became one of the most watched daytime programs in the country. People loved his accent, his humor, and his willingness to break norms. On March 3, 1969, Apollo 9 launched, but newspapers chose to highlight a potholder fire on Kerr's show. That alone shows how strong his presence had become. The show earned Emmy nominations in 1970 and 1971. Guest appearances from celebrities like Phyllis Diller and Johnny Carson made episodes feel more like comedy sketches than cooking lessons. The mix of food and humor made him unforgettable, even if critics argued he played too loosely with tradition. Nurses asked him for autographs while he recovered from a serious car accident in 1971. Proof that his fame followed him everywhere. Merchandise deals soon followed. Cookbooks, cookware, and wine lines brought in huge sales. Some wine bottles from the late 1960s even became collector's items. His jokes about rising dough and other double meanings kept audiences entertained and helped define modern cooking entertainment. Behind the scenes, the pace was brutal. At the Ottawa studio, they sometimes filmed as many as 30 episodes per week. Kerr smoked between takes to stay awake, while Trina edited tirelessly. Crew members worked long days to keep up, and Kerr's energy often collapsed as soon as the cameras stopped. The stress and the injuries from the 1971 accident made it harder to continue, and the show ended in 1972 when the pace became impossible. At the height of it all, Kerr earned around $1 million a year. His parties sparkled with Hollywood stars and tables crowded with rich, buttery dishes. But critics soon began calling him the Liberace of the food world and saying he had little respect for food. None of the criticism stopped him from becoming a symbol of a golden television era where fun mattered as much as food. Graham Kerr stepped into fame during the 1960s and 1970s with a bright smile, wild energy, and a style so bold that critics either loved him or tore him apart. Food critic Michael Field once called him the Liberace of the food world, laughing at his shiny suits and loud presentations. Then in 1970, James Beard went after him in print, calling him a clown with no respect for food. That attack started a media firestorm that lasted months. Kerr fired back with passion, insisting he was an entertainer, not a traditional chef. Newspapers and magazines covered every blow, and the drama only pulled more people toward his show. Viewers watched him jump over chairs, swing pots like props, and cook with a sparkle in his eye. Some thought he was brilliant. Others thought he was ridiculous. Either way, everyone was watching. All that excitement hid something personal. Kerr loved talking about clarified butter and wine as if they were magic potions that could make life healthier. He presented himself as fit and disciplined while telling viewers to enjoy these rich flavors. But behind the cameras, the non-stop tasting and constant filming sent his weight climbing until he reached almost 200 pounds. It became a private embarrassment he tried hard to hide. He would joke on screen about indulgence while secretly battling the effects of it. When interviews and memoirs later revealed his struggle, people were surprised to see how different his real life was from the polished TV image. His humor was another spark that kept viewers glued to the screen.